Thank you, Pastor, for letting me be here. I love coming here. I'm telling you, it's great. In fact, when I was sitting here this morning, my wife is right now speaking to over 150 women at a women's conference right now, and she just texted me while worship was going on, and she's getting ready to close up for the weekend. She's been with these ladies for the whole weekend, speaking in Albany, New York. And so last time she came here with me, but today she wasn't able to. So I do bring you greetings from her. I don't know if Joe Jansen's been here, but he's our U.S. Ministries Director, and he said to say hi. He's in New York City. And then Tom Brazell was recently here. He's our Missions Director, and he is back home having dental work. So he wasn't even able to come to Connecticut for the conference this year. But I really love being here. It's really cool. And while I was sitting here, I was sitting there thinking, I just wish I had brought some young people with me. And they need to see this kind of a work. They need to see this, what God's doing in places like this. Because there's big vision and big possibilities in a place like this. I'm serious. And we had over 150 children in our vacation Bible school last year. And that can happen in a place like this. I was driving here this morning. There's more people in this town than in the town I pastored. So you can do it. Amen? And so let's see God do some great things in the future of this church. He's already done an amazing thing here. And so just building on that solid foundation you talked about. So it's really, really, really good. I think last time I was here, the Lord gave me a word to speak. And I looked at my notes. And if I remember correctly, those of you who got a good memory, or I think I spoke from Jeremiah, where I talked about when God puts you on hold, don't hang up. Does anybody remember that? Okay. Well, the sermon that I'm going to share with you today is a word that the Lord gave me only for certain select churches. When I became the president, I don't travel as much out of the country anymore. It just happens to be that I'm going to Africa next couple of weeks. I'm only going to 2 countries a year. Whereas when I was pastoring the church that I mentioned, they sent me like 5 or 6 times a year outside. Now I'm going to churches all over America, and most of my travel, I'm away somewhere every single weekend. But when I was asked to be the president, and I didn't want to be the president, like I said earlier, I wanted to stay the pastor of my church. But God called me to that position, and I'm doing it. And I'm rejoicing these days. I wasn't in the beginning. I was being obedient more so, but now I love it. I get to do what I feel like God has called me to do. And He's called me. Let me just say this: He's called me to be a pastor. That's what I am. I love people, but now He's given me a new assignment. Does that make sense? In other words, my gifts and calling are to be pastoral, but I've got a new assignment. Part of that assignment is to come places like this. It's really cool. And so, and I couldn't do that while I was pastoring my church. So they asked me to come away from that thing. But when that happened, I said, Lord, I want you to speak to me. And this is what He said to me. I went to Africa, where I have some friends, and I went there and I just rested, which is very hard for me because I'm a workaholic. But I just rested, just sat down and waited. And the Lord gave me 4 sermons, one of which I already preached to this church. That was last time I came. And anytime I go anywhere, I say, Lord, is it one of these or a new one? And this time the Lord said to me very clearly, in fact, it was when I was supposed to come here back along, I was supposed to be here, but one of our pastors passed away. He died of cancer, and I was really honored that they asked me to conduct the funeral. In fact, I just talked to his wife yesterday. I went to J.C. Penney's up here in Manchester, and I'm walking up there, and I'm recalling that I was literally supposed to be here, and then I did a funeral, and the Lord said, call that wife right now, because I hadn't called her since the funeral. And so I called her, Christine, yesterday and just talked with her and stuff. But she's doing really well. Her husband was suffering very, very bad over such a long time, and it was kind of a peaceful thing for him to go be with Jesus and get a full healing that way. And but back then, the Lord gave me the word I'm going to share with you. I want you to know that I asked him, I said, did you want me to do something different? But no, there's a word that the Lord gave me in Africa for you. I don't want to share that with you, okay? Me and Carol travel a lot, and how many of you have a GPS? You know what I mean by GPS? Either on your phone, a smartphone, or otherwise. Well, I am thankful for GPSs because I would not know how to get here. You know what I'm saying? And people said that about my church too. How in the world do you get to South Butler? Well, it's north of North Butler, and Butler Center's in the middle. You know what I'm saying? That's where I lived. And but I'm glad for GPS. And you know, in a couple of weeks, Thanksgiving weekend, I'll be in New York City. One time, Carol and I were going, and I know how to get to New York City. I've been there many times over the years, and I only really know a couple of places of how to get to. And then from there, it's Subway. You know, not the store you eat food. I mean, the thing you ride. And so I was driving, and Carol and I discussed and said, let's go a different way. And I said, okay, where do you want to go? She said, let's go through the Holland Tunnel, which we used to go over the GW, George Washington Bridge, to get to where Nysum is where we would go. And so I go down through the Holland Tunnel, GPS and everything, and all of a sudden, in the Holland Tunnel, the GPS goes out. It doesn't work in the tunnel. And I'm in a lane that I didn't realize was the wrong lane until I came out. Because when you go down into the tunnel, you get one of 3 lanes, and you can't change lanes because they have these little markers going through the middle of the thing. And I am not sure which lane I'm supposed to be in. And sure enough, when I came out the other side, I get right up into the middle of Times Square. Okay? Now here's this. This is very important. If you could follow me, just kind of pretend that little red glass over there is where I want to go. I want to go to Queens. I want to go to Astoria. That's the name of the town that I want to go to, a place called New York School of Urban Ministry, Nysum. That's where I want to go. I have amazing sense of direction. I can tell you, if I was standing in Times Square, I knew it was that direction. I have that. But the roads between here and there are all over the place. And so I come out, and sure enough, now I'm in Times Square. I need to go over there, but I found out something else. In the midst of all those tall buildings, the GPS does not work. So now my GPS is not working again, and I find myself going round and round and round in circles. Like, I mean, one-way streets every single way you look. I finally ended up, watch this is very important for my illustration. I finally ended up going down the wrong way of a one-way street because I knew where I was supposed to go. You know what I'm saying? And thank God he blinded all policemen, and young people don't do this, okay? But that's what I did, okay? And just for a little while, just enough, and I prayed, and until I got through there. But basically, I was in circles, and I broke the circle, and went a different way, in order. And then, sure enough, as soon as I got on the right direction, the GPS went on, and God's global positioning told me where to go. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I ended up going in the right direction. And when I got to Nysum, I sat down in the car, and the Lord spoke a word to my heart. And he said this to me. He said, people in my churches are going in circles, and they need to break the cycle. That's what he told me. He said, I find people all the time in my churches. And so later on, I went to Africa, and I started thinking about that word. And the Lord began to show me that there are people all over, churches, even churches, who are stuck in cycles. They get stuck. For example, people are in financial crisis cycles all over. Like for example, everything is going good, everything's going good, they're in the cycle, they're doing well. And the way the industry in the business world, they call this jumping the curve. Because you don't want to stay in a cycle like people who sell 8-track tapes. Do you remember those things? Those are old enough. You didn't want to keep trying to sell 8-track tapes. Eventually you have to break the cycle and sell cassettes. And then cassettes went to CDs. And most of the young people in the world don't even know what a CD is, no less an 8-track tape. And then you break the cycle, and that's in every field. You see what I'm saying? And today, it's downloadable material without even having an iPod. And some of you don't even know what an iPod is. But we break the cycles in order to progress with where God is sending a business or an industry. What I found is churches, of all people, who have an encounter and a touch with God, who knows the beginning from the end, ought to be able to break cycles to go where God's going. But we get stuck. We get stuck in cycles. You're financially doing fine, and all of a sudden your boiler breaks, and you're back around in the cycle. And things don't go well. And you're stuck in a cycle. There's all kinds of cycles that I find. There's family dysfunction cycles. How many know what I'm talking about? Your family just never seems to break that crazy thinking. Come on. You're in. I wrote some down this morning as I was preparing my message. Just things that maybe even God might have been speaking to me for you. How about this one? Have you ever met anybody that's so negative all the time? I mean, you just walk in and you're like, you know you didn't do anything because you don't even know them. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? But you feel like you did something because their negativity is all over you before you even, you go into a store, you want to buy their apparel or something like that, and they're negative. They're stuck in cycles. People are just stuck in negativity. Another one I wrote down this morning is mediocre living. People just live at a lower level, and they're stuck in it, in cycles. Powerless ministry, a spirit of poverty. The town I lived in, the town I pastored in, I think in some ways that the people bragged about how many refrigerators they can put in their front yard. And I love those people. I pastored those people. We helped care for those people. But it was like stuck in poverty. They had learned to live on welfare instead of getting out there and getting to work. And I'm not talking about people who really welfare was created for. I'm talking about people who use the system. They're stuck in cycles. And I think the church can get stuck in cycles. There's chronic failure. It's one thing to fail. Every one of us fail. I fail. But then there's people that seem just to fall in it all the time. Are you with me? Are you hearing what I'm saying? And so I feel like the Lord wants me to share with you today. And I think this is a word for some of you in this room, if not all of us. But I definitely think it's also for this church. We must ask God what cycles we must jump the curve. What cycles are we in that we need to say, God, it's time to make a decision. It's time to turn differently, and it's time to break cycles. Now, I want you to know this is not a disciplined word from the Lord. I have hope for this church. I believe it's going to break cycles. But I'm here to say to you, it starts with us. It starts with individuals. And so I want to preach a little bit about that. If you have a Bible and you like to follow along, you can turn it on and... Or open the door, But either way, man, Deuteronomy chapter 2. Deuteronomy chapter 2 is a book that's written. It's called Deuteronomy Duet, the second recording for the next generation of what happened in the law. Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, what you see is an interesting thing. Moses is recognizing that all the people have been traveling, watch this now, in circles for 40 years. It says it right in the Bible. We'll read it. And they circle mountains after mountains after mountains. And God said to them, it's time to break the cycle. Here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. Then we turned and journeyed into the wilderness of the way of the Red Sea. As the Lord spoke to me, He said, and we have, in my Bible, in the New King James, it says skirted. But if you look in the margin, and if you look at the New American Standard Version and NIV, it says, we have circled Mount Seir many days. And the Lord, verse 2, spoke to me, saying, you have circled this mountain long enough, turn northward. And command the people, saying, you are about to pass through the territory of your brethren, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. And they will be afraid of you. Therefore, watch yourselves carefully. Do not meddle with them, for I will not give you any of their land, not so much as one footstep, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. You shall buy food from them with money, and that you may eat, and you shall also buy water for them with money, that you may drink. For the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He knows you're trudging through this great wilderness. For 40 years you've been circling this mountain. God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. Now, just because you're in a cycle does not mean that it's a bad thing. Because God does great things. He birthed our church in 1831. And I was the 77th pastor. And that church was doing really, really well for 77 years. The things I believe that we were doing as a church were birthed out of 77 different pastors hearing from God for their church and their season. But one of the things I found when I came to that church is that the people were stuck in a cycle. And God wanted to move us on to something else. He wanted to break the cycle. If you will, the words that were here, you have circled this mountain long enough. So let me give you 3 illustrations that I think will help you to break the cycles. How many of you feel like that would help you? Maybe even in your own life this morning. Maybe even in your own life. Say, God, I need to break the cycle. I've been going around this mountain long enough. The first thing you need to do if you're going to break the cycle is identify your defeating circumstance. Because what causes you to stay in a cycle often is a defeating experience. It's not gaining ground anymore. It's like you're running on a treadmill going nowhere. And people who run on a treadmill going nowhere have mistaken activity for advancement. And that's what happens to us a lot of times. I'm counseling a young woman right now who's in a relationship with this young man, and she's got 2 little babies. Her husband left her 5 years ago, and she's been dating this guy, and she's waiting for him to ask her to marry him. And the other day he got spooked when even somebody suggested it. And I'm kind of saying to this woman, how long are you going to stay on this counsel? How long are you going to stay in this relationship? You know, you might want to break the cycle. And she's thinking, I've invested. Yes, you've invested, but if he isn't going to be the man, you need to get on. You see what I'm saying? You need to break the cycle. And so this fits in lots of different ways. But look what he says right here. He says this. And the Lord spoke to me, verse 2, there it is. It says, you have skirted, say it with me, this mountain. Come on, say it. This mountain. Come on, say it again. This mountain. You have circled this mountain long enough. The first thing we must do is identify our mountain. Identify the defeating circumstance. I'm gonna rapidly move along because of time. I want to get 3 points to you. But let me tell you a mountain that was in my life. But in order to tell you that, I got to tell you a story that's very painful. If my wife were here, I would say this story. It's going to be about me and her. It's going to be about something that I didn't do well as a husband. But my wife and I, when we first got to the church, I'm 100% that men and women, I'm for 100% that men and women could serve God in any capacity. I'm 100% that it's amazing to me that you have a female pastor. I think it's amazing that you have a pastor, watch this, that's called and gifted and has a character to pastor a church regardless of gender. I'm 100% that. I believe that. So I married my wife because she thinks I'm like not only good looking, but she thinks I'm a great partner with her because I have that kind of belief. The only problem is when we got into the ministry together and we were serving together, it was a little threatening to me because she started moving in her gifts. And this little church was so conservative. And she came from an Assembly of God background. I came from a Baptist background. And all of a sudden, I'm saying, honey, you're going to scare those people. She'd get up there with her guitar and start leading worship. And I'm like, honey, they're not used to that. They like hymns. Can you back off? This is the day it's going to scare them. You know, what a mighty God we serve. Old songs, hymns, you know, they want to do hymns. And she started singing these other songs. And I said, honey, would you calm it down? And then after they started liking those songs, she started singing them to the point where, you know, we would do like, this is the day that the Lord, all that stuff. We would do that. But she would do it 5 times through. I'm thinking 3 is enough. You know what I'm saying? And I would tell her that. We would go home and I would say, honey, I just want you to know, I think 5 times? Come on. 3 is enough. You know what I'm saying? And how many know that at church we were having a great time with God, but on the way home we were having intense fellowship. Because all of a sudden I'm quenching my wife, you see. And I'm hurting my wife because my wife has these gifts. But I'm afraid because I already know the reason that church is going to succeed is not because of her, it's because of me. That's how I'm thinking. And I didn't even see it. And because it caused us some problems, you know, in our marriage, we were fighting because, you know, we went to the elders of our church and said, we want to submit this to you. They agreed with her, which meant I would never talk to them again. That ain't going to happen. I'm not talking to them. I'm telling you right now. Of course, I talked to them. But my point is that they weren't very helpful to me. And so then we finally, you know, and it wasn't just like that. My wife is a prophet. She's an amazing prophetic gift. And they weren't used to that in that church. In that church, they didn't do those kinds of things because they were in a cycle. Are you with me? And they weren't used to being people coming up and saying, thus saith the Lord, bang. You know, and I would tell her, calm down. You're freaking them out. And submit. You know, that didn't help. I'll tell you that right now. You know. Now, quickly, we went to counseling because the elders weren't any help. And so we're sitting there in counseling, and the counselor said to me, Chris, I think you're trying to be the Holy Spirit for your wife. Which is interpreted, watch this, you're trying to control your wife. And I was. I was trying to control my wife. I could spiritualize it any way you want. I could say, I'm in charge, I'm the one that's being paid, I'm the pastor, I'm the lead guy, God ultimately puts on me. I could have said anything I want, submit, that's what it says in some part of the Bible. I could have done all that, but at the end of the day, I knew God was speaking to my heart, that I'm controlling her. So you got to identify your mountain in order to break your mountain. You've been circling this mountain long enough, Chris. The first thing we have to do is say, identify the mountain. What's the thing? And sometimes you can't see the mountain because you're circling it. And I needed help. I needed help. This is 30 years ago, folks. But I needed help to identify my arrogance. So identify the mountain. So point 1, identify your mountain. Identify your defeating circumstances. What keeps you stuck? Number 2, take a new direction. So they both begin with the word D in it. You know what I'm saying? Identify your defeating circumstance and take a new direction. If you read the next verse, it's verse 3. It says, you've been circling this mountain long enough. Then it says this. Watch this. Now turn north. It's powerful. Take a new direction. Take a new direction. My church, man, it was very, very traditional when I went to that church, and God was in that church just as He was here today. It was amazing, you know. Had a great spirit into worship today. Pastor sharing in her heart, and some of your prayer. Good stuff. Good stuff. But we were hearing from God that we wanted to see our church grow. And I had a team of elders. When I first got, this will take too long to preach and teach, but when I got to that church, this is no joke, 36 people in my church, 24 people on the board. No. Oh, dear. I'm telling you, it was hard to lead that church. Of course, I didn't learn that from Bible school. All I learned from Bible school was Bible. You know what I'm saying? Nobody taught me how to lead people. I had to learn that by the seat of my pants as a pastor. Nowadays, we teach more about that, so we can have training to help people like me and pastors, young pastors, come into a church and learn how to help lead people. But I didn't know that, so I learned by the seat of my pants as I was going along. Loved them, cared for them, all 24 plus the 30, the other, up to 36, the other 8, and so. But here's the deal. Here's the deal. I really only needed 2 people because there was, I won't say their names because it would indict them. But there was Frank and Susie. That's not their name. And the other 11 each supported Frank and Susie. Really all I needed to do was deal with Frank and Susie, and everybody else would agree. And it was divided. The board was divided. 12 and 12. And there I was. And I wasn't the board chairman. For 10 years, Frank was a very strong person. He loved that church. He gave lots of money to that church. He cared about that church. But here's the problem. Frank didn't want a pastor to lead that church. And I love Frank. Frank helped me, helped my wife out when we were a young married couple. But when I started to lead, Frank didn't like that. But I still love Frank. And for 10 years, I loved Frank. I cared for Frank. We had a prophet come to our church around the 10th year. I remember them, Jim and Judy Stevens. And they came in and they spoke. Well, the night before they came up to preach, me and my wife were laying there in bed. Sorry for the picture. But we were talking. Sometimes that's the only time you can just relax. And we were talking about it, and I said, Carol, just sharing my heart with my wife. I said, I love this church, but watch this. I used the language to help you understand what I was saying. If we can continue to circle this mountain, maybe they need another pastor. I just don't know how I can do it. And Frank, he seems to be staying and stuck. And I love Frank, but I just can't lead on with him being in charge. Something's got to change, or they need a better pastor. That's what I said. The next day, the preacher gets up there and preaches a sermon, and you would have thought he was a fly in our bedroom. He didn't say those exact words, but he said enough to basically say, in a nutshell, you have to let your pastor lead this church. That's what he was prophetic. He knew nothing of what was going on. So I got up in front of the church and I said, listen, you wouldn't believe this, but Frank, man, he might have been in my room last night. He was so on. And I said to him, listen, I said to Frank, I said to the church, I said, me and Carol were talking last night, and I just feel like, man, I love it. By that time, the church had grown to about 100. And 10 years. 36 to 100. And I said, I love this church, but I'm telling you, unless we, watch this, break the cycle. I didn't say that. I said, unless we change. Maybe I'm not the guy to continue pastoring this church. That's what I said to my congregation. And, of course, Frank came up and said, I don't think that's really cool that you're threatening. I said, I'm not threatening, man. I said, if you want to lead this church, you lead this church, but the both of us can't lead this church. That was so hard because I love Frank. Frank decided to quit the eldership. He still stayed in the church until he died. He was still a friend, but he made the decision, I'll step aside. And we broke the cycle. 1 year later, we're at 200. 2 years later, we're at 250. 3 years later, we're at 400. Immediately, when we broke the cycle and said, we have got to make significant change. We've got to go north. Something changed. And it wasn't about changing necessarily the people. It was about being willing to hear from God and say, let's do something we've never done before. Go north. Isn't that cool? Yeah. I go to churches all over America that I don't preach this message to. And the reason is I don't think they're ready to hear it. I think this church is ready to hear it. I think this church has fertile ground. Listen, the word of the Lord is coming. And it's not the seed that needs life, because it's a word of the Lord. It's the ground that needs to be fertile. And I believe this place is one of the places God is going to say some things. It won't be right away, but in the next year or two, you'll see it. God will start saying to you, I got new places for you to go as a church. Break the cycle. Number one, what do? Identify the mountain, defeating circumstances. Number two, take a new direction. Go north. Number three, and I'm done. It's almost time to go. They told me I had to be done before 5 o'clock. Sometime around 11:30, and I'm right there. So I'm gonna. How many of you will give me just one more minute? Is that okay? Just one more minute. So I got 10 minutes right there. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Here we go. Number 3. Embrace the demand. Now this is the hardest part. Embrace the demand. He says, listen, I'll just paraphrase it to save time. He says, when you go into the town where Esau has been given, new rules. For the last 40 years, you didn't have to work for food. Manna came every time you showed up. Quail came to the beach. You didn't have to work. But if you want food from now on, even if you want a drink, you got to work for it. That's what I paraphrased the next 4 verses. That's what he said. New day, new demand. New direction, new demand. Let me take you back to the counseling appointment my wife and I were in. The counselor says to me, Chris, I think you're trying to be the Holy Spirit for your wife. I think you're trying to control. That's what she was really saying. And then she asked this crazy question. She was a spirit-filled, godly counselor. And she asked this question. She said, Chris, what is the thing that you least or were most frustrated with about your mother? I'm like, don't bring my mom into this. This is my wife. Come on. What are you doing? But she was getting to something. And she said, what was the thing? Now, my mom, she's in heaven today, a dear lady, loved me, loved our family. But it didn't take a second for me to know. How many know what I'm talking about? Because perfect as moms can be, there can be an irritant there. Same with us kids, right? And immediately it came to me. I knew exactly what it was. And this was the thing, I'm just going to be a little transparent with you. But this was the thing that used to frustrate me and irritate me most and bring pain to me. And this was it. Whenever my mom gave her opinion about something and I didn't take it, she made me feel stupid. I don't think you should get baptized when I got born again. You were baptized as a baby. Well, I went ahead and got dunked anyway. Well, that was stupid. See what I'm saying? And I was 18. But I felt I listened to her opinion, but when I didn't take her opinion is when I felt like she couldn't handle me thinking different than her. And that's just the way my mom was. And I loved her, but it was hard. And I shared that with the counselor. And watch this. This is what the counselor said to me. She said, that's what you're doing to your wife. Wow. She nailed me, man. Not only did she tell me my problem, she told me how I was making my wife feel. I look over there, my wife's crying, which that doesn't help. It changed me. So she said, here's your assignment, Chris, as a counselor. A good counselor will give assignments, not just hear your poor toilet training. And she said, Chris, this is what I want you to do. Chris, you have no idea how hard this was, Pastor. She said, Chris, I want you to not give your opinion to your wife unless she asks for it. In fact, Chris, you can't say to your wife, you ought to just sing that 3 times. You should not sing it 5 times. You cannot say anything to your wife of your opinion unless she asks for it. Do you know my wife didn't ask for it? My wife didn't ask for it. I waited a whole day and she never asked me one time. My wife never asked me in 2 weeks. Watch this, in 3 weeks. In 5 months, my wife never asked me my opinion. Somehow or another, she got on with life without my opinion. But then that glorious day came. I remember it. When she asked my opinion, do you think we should sing this song? I gave my opinion. And she didn't take it. I'm being funny to make it easier, but it was tough. To go through that was a demand. And this is where people fail the most when it comes to breaking cycles. They identify mountains. They make decisions. We need to go this direction. But when they make the decision, you have to embrace the demand of the new territory. It's not the same. We never did that this way before. That's why you're going north. New territory. Well, let me tell you something. This is how I'll end my message. And I'm over for about 10 minutes almost. I got 10 from you. I end my sermon by saying this. I never give my opinion today to anybody unless they ask for it. It changed me. See, I grew up with a mother that gave her opinion all the time, and I learned that. I gave my opinion to everybody. Now, I just wait until that question comes. How many of you know I have a few opinions? But how many of you know the new demand on me is to listen for that voice that says, what do you think? Do you have any suggestions? How is it going? Now, obviously, my role as a pastor and now the president of Elam, there are times when just by the virtue of my job, I have to give opinion. But I don't need to give everybody my opinion. I need to wait. Isn't that cool? How many know that a lot more people are happy with me, especially my wife, but then also I'm released from the pressure of trying to have answers for everybody. It's amazing. And God did that for me because I broke the cycle. Let's stand together. I hope this was encouraging. I used my story about my wife because I wanted to say I could have told you story after story after story about things that I broke the cycles of in my church. But as I said at the beginning, I don't know if that's the dominant message here today. I think the dominant message is for each of us to look into our lives and say, where are we stuck? Are we stuck? And God, is there any new direction you want me to take? Individually, not as a church, individually, because it starts there. And you have to know, when God started dealing with me and my marriage, that it positively affected my church. You see what I'm saying? So how many of you feel like you need a new direction? Raise your hand. Okay, good. Let me pray for you then. And then I'll turn it over to Pastor. Father, thank you for this day. I thank you for the patience of these people to let me go over. And I ask you, God, now to bring a blessing to each one of them. I pray, Lord, that your voice would be clear amidst all the other voices. That you would give them that clear, crystal voice that says, go north. And they would know what that means on an individual basis. Then help them embrace the demand of the new territory. It's in your name we pray. And everyone said?